Welcome back. I think we should go ahead and get started. We're going to spend a good portion of the afternoon, not the entire afternoon, really exploring hunger, which is an issue I think that's dear to everyone's heart. I'd like to start off by introducing you to Christina Holt, who's the director of the Lawrence Hunger Project and has really been an incredible source of inspiration within the community on mobilizing people around hunger. So thank you for joining us today, Christina. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Christina Holt, and I'm a volunteer with the Lawrence Hunger Project, and I also work here at the University of Kansas at the Work Group for Community Health and Development. So great to be with you all. I'd just like to start out with this quote. In the 21st century, the world has no excuse for tolerating the existence of 1 billion people going without food. So today's discussion will start with some reflections that I'll offer after attending the Kansas Hunger Dialogue in this year and last year, some facts about worldwide hunger, and then also implications for Christians and what can be done. So Manna, which is a nonprofit organization out of El Dorado, Kansas, is really working to raise awareness about global hunger issues and local hunger issues, and they have brought together stakeholders around Kansas the last couple of springs for discussion around local and global hunger issues and what can be done by institutions of higher education as part of their research, teaching, and public service missions. And so I've had the opportunity to hear from experts in hunger from around the nation and around the world. And some of what I'll be sharing with you today were some of the insights and things that I learned from them. So I'll be acknowledging them some. And special thanks will go to Margaret Ziegler, who's the Deputy Director of the Congressional Hunger Center, June Hinton, Harriet Giles, and Clark Solomon from Auburn University in Alabama, Tony Hall, the Executive Director of the Alliance to End Hunger, and Douglas Casson-Coots from the United Nations World Food Program. So some of these slides are thanks to them. So hunger is a condition in which people do not get enough food to provide the nutrients for fully productive, active, and healthy lives. And of course, hunger can be acute or it can be long-term. And actually about 1 billion of our world neighbors are chronically hungry, and 400 million of those people are children, which is more than the entire United States population. So around the world, every day, 1.2 billion people live on less than $1 each day, and every 6 seconds, another child dies from hunger. Also, hunger is an issue that disproportionately affects women and children. So 7 out of 10 of the world's hungry are women or children. And something that really hit home for me was I consider myself in the field of public health, and I learned something that I didn't know. And that is that hunger and hunger-related illnesses kill more people than AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis combined. And of course, the really tragic thing about that is we know what to do about hunger and hunger-related diseases. There are a lot of efforts that can be put into place to prevent the needless suffering that hunger causes. And so the fact that 25,000 people a day die from hunger and hunger-related diseases is completely unconscionable. So I'd like to share with you a couple of stories that were shared. This is Ambassador Tony Hall. He is a public servant from Ohio. He spent decades doing lots of different kinds of political work. And he currently is the executive director of the Alliance to End Hunger, but he has had the opportunity to travel to over 100 different countries throughout the world. He shared a story. In 1984, he was one of the first Americans to be on the ground in Ethiopia when the famine was taking place then. And he shared that he was flown in on a small plane. He was traveling with Mother Teresa's sisters, and he was flown into a small clinic and spent the day in a clinic that had 6 beds. And the doctor said, "I'd like to take you outside and I would like to show you, something." And so they went outside, and he said there were approximately 1,000 people waiting for services outside of this small clinic. And he said people started handing them their babies and small children, and literally within a matter of minutes, 17 babies and small children had died. And he said that was just a pivotal, transformational time for him when he realized the suffering that was happening outside of the United States that so many of us really know nothing about, or don't let it transform us and have it lead to action in the way that it should. Knowing about these different numbers is just not really real to us sometimes. And he shared that after that, he actually went on a fast. I believe it was 21 days where he fasted from food to really raise awareness about global hunger. And he was a congressman from Ohio at that time, and so he was making a political statement and really trying to get people to have more solidarity with the least among us. And so he said, when I heard him speak in 2011, he said, "Never has there been a time when I'm more outraged by hunger than I am right now." And that was right before he embarked on a 28-day fast last spring to really try to rekindle solidarity with the poorest in the world. And this question here, a drop in the bucket, he shared, he actually did have the opportunity to travel with Mother Teresa, and he said he was in the streets of Calcutta with her traveling, and he was observing her helping someone in the street, and a reporter came up to Mother Teresa and was asking her, "Don't you think it's just a drop in the bucket?" And her answer was, "Absolutely not. It matters to that person." And she turned to Tony later and she said, "Not everybody can come to Calcutta like you, but everybody can do something." So I'd just like to take a minute to share about how many people are hungry around the world. So in the late 1960s through about 97, we saw a lot of decrease in the absolute number of people around the world who were experiencing extreme hunger. However, as you can see, that downward trend unfortunately did not hold. And the numbers, of course, these are the most recent that I could find, but the numbers continue to escalate due to the economic crises happening in many parts of the world and due to the escalating costs of food. So this graph shows food prices in 2011, and you can obviously see the large spike in price of food for various commodities. So I'm sorry if that's a little hard to read. So this graph depicts where the hungry people around the world live. of times we don't necessarily realize that there's a lot of hungry people outside of sub-Saharan Africa, and actually the largest number of hungry people live in Asia and the Pacific, and you can see also that some smaller slices of that pie chart are representing hunger in Latin America and the Caribbean, North Africa, and also developed countries. And I know Jeremy Farmer is here, and he'll be speaking to us about the issue of hunger and food insecurity here locally. So hunger and food insecurity are obviously complex issues, and there are lots of different fields that have a role to play in addressing these issues. So it relates to obviously agriculture, but also the government does have a lot to do with it. And I was just speaking with someone before this session about the importance of advocacy and lobbying to make sure that there's political will for addressing hunger. And the interesting thing is that it's not like we don't know development strategies and different agricultural practices and things that can help prevent severe drought and famine from happening. So we'll talk a little bit more about action that we can take a little bit later in our time together, but certainly government does have a role to play. So you may have heard of the Millennium Development Goals, and those were established by a delegation of the United Nations, and there are 8 goals, and the first one of them is eradicating poverty and extreme hunger. And the goal is, all of the Millennium Development Goals were set to be achieved by 2015. Unfortunately, we're not on course to meet all of the Millennium Development Goals, but it has been a great mobilizing tool for at least having common vision for development aspirations worldwide. And this shows a map of progress that's being made towards the Millennium Development Goal of reducing extreme poverty and hunger. And those red areas, if you can see them, the red areas on the map are those that are actually worsening in terms of extreme hunger. And the dark green shows that they have met the Millennium Development Goals, so there is progress being made in some places. So, just to give you an idea. And as I shared, Ambassador Tony Hall said the stakes are higher on problems of hunger than ever before, both here in America and around the world. And one thing that was really interesting to me was when he first started his political career several decades ago, he administered a survey in the state of Ohio to his constituents, and he gave them a list of 20 issues and had people rank them in the order of importance to them. And where do you think hunger came in? Any guesses? They came in number 20. But the thing that I found very inspiring was that decades of his political career, he was very committed to raising awareness about hunger issues, both internationally, which was really what his passion was, but he realized a lot of people are concerned about the hunger that obviously their neighbors and their fellow comrades here are facing. And so he really started educating himself more about issues of domestic hunger and traveling around and meeting with people. And he shared stories like that he met an older couple who was making really tough choices between medication and food and had been watering down a can of tomato soup for the past 2 weeks that they had been living on. And that's here in the United States. So he started really raising awareness about local and international hunger. And the most recent survey that's been done in Ohio, where constituents ranked the top 20 issues, hunger came in second. I found that really encouraging, that you really can raise people's awareness and political will to do something about it. So I know this can be overwhelming and depressing to think about the suffering that is happening around the world, but I think it's really important to not harden our hearts to it, and it really does have implications for our faith, and so we'll talk about that a little bit here. So I wanted to share, this is one of my most favorite scriptures that really speaks to me. It's from Matthew 25. Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And this passage from the book of Matthew just reminds us how very dear to God's heart are the poor, and that Jesus teaches that whatever we do for the least among us, we're doing for him. And this is something that I think is good to reflect on after we hear about the needs of those suffering around us. Another scripture from Luke, verses 12 and 13. When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And a proverb, chapter 31, verse 8 and 9. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And obviously throughout the scriptures we see a theme of God's compassion and his love and his solidarity with the least among us, and an admonishment to us to not be materialistic and to be open-handed to those, and to really give voice to those in our community and in our world who do not always have that voice. This one, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. And so I've really been kind of grappling personally with, as a Christian and as someone who aspires to try to have my life hopefully reflect the love of God, what can I do practically to make a difference? And I haven't totally arrived there. There's a lot more that I would like to do that I have not yet done. And obviously, there's so much suffering. There's a lifetime probably of work for all of us. But one small thing that I engaged in was, actually some of you in this room participated, just sort of a ragtag band of students and concerned community members held on World Food Day last fall a food packaging event to try to raise awareness about the issue, obviously the famine that was happening, as well as suffering that's happening here locally. And so we used it as an opportunity to raise awareness about issues related to local and global hunger, and about 600 volunteers from the community came together to package 97,000 meals that were sent to the Horn of Africa, and we did that in partnership with New Manna. And we also partnered with Jeremy and Just Food to hold a local food drive to benefit our local neighbors. And an aspiration of that was not only doing this one-time event, but really to try to educate people about issues. And we had tables where people could learn about things, and we had photos from people who had done different development efforts in Africa. And so it was a learning experience in a lot of ways, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what's next. But the good news is that there are a lot of student groups who care deeply. There's a lot of people of faith in the community, a lot of nonprofit organizations that really want to do more. And recently I've had the opportunity to help support a community health assessment that's being led by the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department, and certainly one of the re-emergent themes that's been coming out of focus groups and interviews and surveys is access to affordable and healthy food. So I'm hopeful that there continues to be a lot of interest, and obviously there's a need for more comprehensive planning for what to do in our community to address these issues. I would be remiss if I did not also point out some online resources for change and improvement. So for my day job, I work at the Work Group for Community Health and Development, where the main project I support is called the Community Toolbox. But the Toolbox is a really great resource for people like you who are passionate about issues and are looking to contribute in different ways. So it's full of things like, how do you do advocacy work, or how do you provide compelling testimony, or how do you do a focus group, or how do you find other people in the community who care about issues like you do. How do you get people together and actually come up with a plan for improving things? How do you get funding? So some of the more like tactical things that people need to know in order to do community work, this is a free online resource for that, and it's Creative Commons licensed, so we really encourage people, like if you work within your church and you want to do training on how to write a letter to the editor or something, we have PowerPoints for that you can download and adapt and use for free. So there's a lot of resources there that hopefully could be of value. And these are a lot of other resources that I've gone to for data or for kind of how to support in educating myself more about hunger issues. So I really liked this. It's from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. But they have an ending hunger movement, and there's a lot, as I'm sure you know, of resources available online and places where you can sign up to receive e-newsletters and different things to help keep yourself informed about the issues. And so I think it's really up to sort of our individual discernment in terms of where all of this information leads us and what to do next. But, you know, first of all, petitioning God and really praying and fasting and remembering the people around the world who don't eat and don't have the luxuries that we do here. And my heart is softened every day because when my 2-year-old prays before our family meals, she always says, "And thank you, God, the poor people get food." So she's praying for the poor people to get food, but she's thanking God. And I think that we can learn so much from our children and from their soft hearts and how they do remember people who are suffering and lift them up in prayer. And also just raising awareness. I know, like, I've brainstormed with Jeremy, like, do you have a speaker advocacy group of people who can go out and share and raise awareness, you I don't know what all the possibilities are, but because of sort of the deluge of information that we receive all the time, it is really important that we help keep issues of poverty and extreme hunger on people's minds. And so anything that we can do within our local faith communities, and obviously with the many civic organizations that I'm sure we are involved with, that's really helpful. And all of that does relate to kind of building that political will for, our government supporting international aid and development efforts. So even as I'm starting to learn more, elected officials, even if it's something that they want to vote for, if they don't feel like their constituents support it, that really can put them in a dilemma. So we need to let our elected officials know where we're coming from and how we feel about these issues, so that they feel that they have the support they need to place the vote the way that we would like to see that happen. And obviously with a lot of our own personal practices that we engage in terms of our personal consumption, we can support fair trade efforts and be more mindful of the ways that our personal behavior affects the global economy. And also, the reality is that even if we do not consider ourselves wealthy, that if we look at our global neighbors and compare ourselves to our global neighbors, we have a lot to give. And so, to really think about ways that we can live more simply, so that we can be more generous in our giving and support of development and longer term, obviously immediate relief, but also longer term solutions that will help prevent the needless suffering that poverty and hunger cause. So I would just like to end with this quote from Desmond Tutu: "Let us not stand back." So I would also like to just open it up if anyone has reflections that you would like to offer, or any questions. I would welcome that, or just a chance for dialogue.
I feel like the question I would ask is kind of theologically sometimes kind of this capacity, but I know various causes like hunger in the United States and globally are complex. But do you think that, not you, but everybody, do people think that we can address that if we're not fundamentally addressing an economy that's organized around the production of profit rather than leading with human? Like, can we do this work without abolishing capitalism, essentially? So yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, okay, so the question that was raised is, can we do this work without fundamentally changing a capitalist economy? And I think that's a really interesting question to consider. I don't feel like I have an answer to that question, and I would certainly welcome any of you who do have an opinion about that to share. I feel like there is a lot that can be done. This is only tangentially related to your question, but I heard someone speaking who was saying, imagine a land where it's completely desolate, it's totally dusty, nothing will grow, it's very, people have to have the food brought in from outside because the land won't produce. And then they said, now fast forward, 100 years almost, and it's a thriving place to be. And they basically said this was Kansas and the Dust Bowl in the 30s, and that had the government not implemented a lot of agricultural and other sorts of support to make the land what it needed to be, that we wouldn't be the breadbasket of the world. And so I am not an expert in the area, but people who are experts tell me there's a lot that can be done to make agriculture work, and that there is a science behind it, and there's a lot of practices that can be done. And so I think, I'm not directly answering your question, but I think there's a ton that we know how to do, and it's just a matter of allocating resources in a way that make that possible.
But the reason that there isn't the allocation is because, because it's like global inequities in terms of, in some ways, like, we can't mobilize political will because there's such a power structure involved that like has vested interests in some people, very people having wealth and many not. So like how do we fight that? How do we like address the root political economic causes of poverty in the United States?
It's a really good question. Does anyone else want to respond to that? It's good for us to reflect on. Yes.
I was just going to mention that probably most of you are in, but Bread for the World, I think is an organization I know of in terms of helping us, for advocacy. Just Google Bread for the World, if you're not aware of the organization, and we just recommend that in terms of an avenue for being aware of what's coming up and how to put it right. It's very, very helpful for the advocacy.
Great. Thank you so much.